Have you ever noticed how some people treat sports like a national emergency, while others barely notice the game is happening? Imagine two friends sitting in the same living room. One of them is standing up, yelling at the TV, heart racing, reacting to every move on the field as if the players can hear him through the screen. The other one is calmly scrolling through their phone, occasionally glancing up and asking something like, "Wait, which team is ours again?" And that moment usually triggers the same reaction. How can you not care about this? For many people, sports feel like a universal language, a cultural ritual. Entire cities stop breathing during championship games. People wear jerseys, paint their faces, memorize player stats like historical facts. To them, sports aren't just entertainment, they're identity. So when someone shrugs and says, "Yeah, I don't really follow sports," it almost feels strange. But here's the fascinating psychological truth. People who don't obsess over sports aren't necessarily missing something. Their brains are simply wired to find meaning, excitement, and belonging in different places. And once you understand the psychology behind it, that difference becomes surprisingly revealing about how human motivation actually works. Think about the last time someone tried to explain a game to you with intense enthusiasm. They're telling you about strategies, rivalries, seasons, statistics. There's a whole emotional universe packed into it. Meanwhile, you're nodding politely, but internally, your brain is thinking something like, "Okay, but why does this matter so much?" And that question, why it matters, is where psychology starts to get interesting. For many sports fans, the emotional attachment isn't really about the sport itself, it's about belonging. Humans are deeply tribal creatures. Long before stadiums and televised games existed, we formed groups for survival. Being part of a tribe meant protection, identity, and shared purpose. That ancient instinct never disappeared. Sports just became one of the modern ways we express it. When someone says, "We won," even though they never stepped onto the field, their brain is experiencing what psychologists call basking in reflected glory. It's the feeling of sharing success with your group. Your team wins, and your brain releases dopamine like you accomplished something personally. It's powerful. But here's the twist. Not everyone's brain seeks identity through group competition. Some people simply don't feel that same tribal pull when watching sports. Their sense of identity might come from creativity, learning, ideas, relationships, or personal goals instead. So while one person feels emotionally invested in a match, another might feel the same excitement reading about psychology, building something new, exploring a hobby, or diving into a good story. Neither brain is wrong. They're just chasing different sources of reward. In fact, studies on motivation often show that people differ dramatically in what psychologists call reward sensitivity. In simple terms, different activities trigger the brain's dopamine system differently for different people. For some, competition lights up the brain like fireworks. For others, competition feels neutral. Not boring exactly, just not emotionally gripping. And if competition doesn't activate your reward system strongly, watching someone else compete becomes even less stimulating. Your brain simply doesn't register the same excitement. This is similar to how some people love roller coasters while others sit there thinking, "Why would I voluntarily do this?" The experience isn't universal, it's neurological. But there's another layer to this. People who don't obsess over sports often show stronger interest in narrative-driven or idea-driven experiences. Their brains crave something slightly different: context, meaning, intellectual stimulation. A game might feel repetitive to them, the same field, similar rules, similar structure every time. But give them a documentary, a podcast, a book, or an intriguing conversation, and suddenly their attention locks in. Their excitement isn't triggered by competition, it's triggered by understanding. You could think of it like two different kinds of curiosity. One kind is competitive curiosity. Who will win? What's the score? Can this team beat the other team? The other is conceptual curiosity. Why do people behave this way? How does the world work? What does this idea mean? Both are powerful. They just aim in different directions. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often feel slightly outsiders during big cultural moments. When a major game is happening, conversations everywhere revolve around it. Offices, social media, family gatherings. It can feel like the entire world is speaking a language you never fully learned. And sometimes that creates an odd psychological pressure. You might pretend to care. You might nod along. You might even Google the score just so you have something to say. But internally, your brain is still asking the same quiet question. Why does everyone care so much? The answer, again, is identity. Sports compress complex human drama into simple, digestible stories. Heroes and villains, victory and defeat, rivalries and redemption arcs. It's like watching an unfolding epic. For fans, it's often just a game. And here's the surprising part. Psychologists have noticed that people who are less drawn to spectator sports sometimes show stronger interest in self-directed activities. Instead of watching competition, they prefer participating in something personally meaningful, learning a skill, creating something, exploring ideas, building experiences. Their sense of reward comes from agency rather than observation. In other words, their brain prefers doing over watching. This doesn't mean sports fans aren't active or curious. Of course, many are. But the psychological balance is slightly different. Some brains love to attach meaning to shared spectacles. Other brains prefer smaller, more personal pursuits. There's also a personality dimension here. Research on personality traits suggests that people higher in openness to experience often gravitate toward abstract interests, philosophy, art, psychology, storytelling, innovation. Meanwhile, people higher in extroversion and competitiveness may be more drawn to energetic social environments like sports culture. Again, neither trait is better. They simply shape what captures your attention. Think of attention like a spotlight. Sports fans point that spotlight towards stadiums, teams, and seasons. Non-fans often point it toward ideas, creativity, or personal exploration. And both spotlights illuminate something meaningful. Another reason some people don't obsess over sports is surprisingly simple. Emotional investment takes effort. To truly care about a team, you need to follow their season, learn the players, understand the stakes, remember past games, and track standings. Your brain builds a whole emotional narrative around it. But if that narrative never hooks you early on, maybe you didn't grow up watching games, maybe no one in your family followed sports, the emotional connection simply never forms. Without that foundation, watching a game feels like opening a novel halfway through. Everyone else knows the characters and the plot. You're just seeing random scenes. So your brain naturally gravitates towards stories where you do understand the context. And there's nothing strange about that. In fact, if you step back, it reveals something beautiful about human psychology. Our interests aren't random. They're reflections of how our minds search for meaning. Some people find meaning in collective energy, stadiums roaring, shared victories, the emotional roller coaster of a season. Others find meaning in quiet exploration, ideas, creativity, personal growth, deep conversations. One isn't more intelligent, one isn't more sophisticated. They're simply different expressions of curiosity. And here's a perspective that often surprises people. You don't need to share the same interests as the crowd to be socially connected. In fact, the diversity of interests is what makes conversations interesting in the first place. Imagine a world where everyone obsessed over the exact same thing. Every conversation would sound identical. What makes human culture fascinating is the variety. The sports fan brings energy, loyalty, and shared excitement. The non-sports fan might bring ideas, analysis, storytelling, or creativity. Different minds filling different roles in the social ecosystem. And once you realize that, something subtle shifts. You stop feeling like you're missing out if you don't care about the big game. You start recognizing that your attention simply flows toward different arenas. Your stadium might be a library, or a studio, or a notebook full of thoughts, or a late-night conversation about why people behave the way they do. Because at the end of the day, what we pay attention to becomes our world. Some people build their world around teams and seasons. Others build it around ideas and experiences.